Hello to all of our viewers out there. I'm Emerald Robinson, and this is the Washington Wrap-Up, the show where we review the political goings-on in what Charles Dickens called the city of grand intentions. Perhaps this week, though, will be forever characterized by less than grand intentions. While China finally stepped up to North Korea and Kim Jong-un stepped back for now from his nuclear threat to the U.S. and its territory of Guam, a perhaps even more deadly weapon aimed itself at the heart of America, threatening to destroy our beautiful country and all that it stands for from within. That enemy is hate. The events in Charlottesville surrounding a statue of an iconic Civil War general made our country almost feel as divided as the time when that man walked on the ground of this great nation. But in actuality, the groups that went to war last weekend in Charlottesville with their extreme idea of identity politics were 200 people or so, and only a speck in the fabric of America. So why are the actions and ideas of this small representation of people being assigned to an entire sect of the American population? Now, there are calls to take down more Confederate monuments and even the Jefferson Memorial, but should they be taken down? And how many Americans really want that? In the wake of the violence, did President Trump's response come too little too late, warranting this mass exodus of CEOs from his advisory boards? As there is more and more of a call from the left for businesses and officials to cut ties with this White House, what does that mean for this administration's agenda and our economy overall? And finally, how do we move forward as a nation to heal and find unity post-Charlottesville? My panel and I will discuss all this, plus another left-right conflict over voter integrity, asking the question, is there election fraud being perpetuated in America? All right, let's get right to it and meet our panelists for this week. An unwilling first-hand witness to last week's events while vacationing with his wife, the Daily Signal reporter Jarrett Stepman is with us. Hi, Jarrett. Thanks for joining us. Horace Cooper is co-chairman of Project 21 and sits on the board of the Free Enterprise Project. Hi, Horace.
Good to be with you.
And Robert Popper, a senior attorney and director of Judicial Watch's Election Integrity Project, who has a lot of experience in voting rights. Hi, Robert.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, great. So thanks for joining me, gentlemen. It's my gentleman in blue this week. I do want to start with you, Jarrett. You were there this weekend when the violence broke out. It was pretty ugly, right? You even wrote in the Daily Signal, though, that this was a small-scale clash between groups who clearly represent an extreme minority in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of interesting circumstances. I originally went down there for a little trip with my wife to try to get away from the politics.
Well, Charlottesville is beautiful and usually quiet and nice and quaint.
A beautiful town. I went there with my wife and ended up right in the middle of this national controversy. And you said it absolutely right when you said this is really just fringe groups. These people don't represent the majority of America. And I could definitely tell from speaking to people in Charlottesville that they didn't really represent the views of the community.
Because your wife posted a tweet talking to a gas station attendant who said, these people are not us. We don't know why they're here, basically.
That's right. I think the general feeling was that these were almost like two roving armies coming in invading their town. And I think the general feeling is they weren't wanted. These were extremist groups, in some cases people holding swastikas and Nazi flags, and these other Antifa groups are also these radical leftists.
And I think a lot of attention is not being given to the fact that Antifa was there, and we actually have some footage if we could show this. This was a reporter who was on the ground and who was mistaken for someone who was with the alt-right.
With the alt-right! If you're with the alt-right, get from here! Get away from here! Get away from here! Get away from here!
They're very inclusive.
I just really have a hard time watching that, Jarrett.
I do too, and frankly, it was the confluence of these two groups meeting in the streets. It was something, a scene almost out of Weimar Germany. It was really incredible seeing, frankly, guys with Nazi swastikas and communists battling it out in the streets. It's incredible to see in a small town USA this to happen.
And this is sort of the extreme of identity politics. But Horace, I feel like we're seeing a shift to a stronger feeling of identity, of an identity with your political party, if I can get it out today. You know a lot about this, politics. Are we seeing a trend that's going to continue?
Well, I'm troubled. A couple things. One is it does appear that political leaders are failing to carry out their responsibilities. Security and law enforcement are one of the primary reasons that government exists. And in these particular instances, we saw this in Ferguson, we also saw it in Charlottesville. What we didn't do is see it in the state of Florida when groups were complaining and threatening to march. The governor in Florida announced that every single violation of anyone's rights would be addressed very aggressively by the law enforcement community. In Missouri, we did not see that. The governor said the opposite, and it appears that something similar happened in Virginia. Yes, they hold odious views, but yes, once you get a permit, it's law enforcement's job to see to it that you can express yourself free from attack and assault from others. This didn't happen.
But, you know, and that's, if we'd played that clip longer, that's what she was saying. Where are the police? Where are the police? She couldn't even find somebody to go help this woman who had just been hit. But, you know, that's a whole nother topic. We could go on and on about.
Well, I mention it to say that the politicians play a role in all of this. If they take to the traditional view, which is that they protect all people who are speaking, we don't see these kinds of conflicts.
Whether you agree or not.
Right. Yep. But if they don't, if they decide, I don't really like you, and I'm going to issue either a hard stand-down order or a soft stand-down order, then this kind of conflict is likely to occur.
Well, that's one thing that the organizer of the original rally, the Unite the Right, said that they, you know, he has a right to say this. Actually, John Hines, One America's John Hines, sat down with him this week, and he spoke about why they originally organized the rally anyway.
Even though the Charlottesville city government has been set on removing the statue of Robert E. Lee, it is actually against Virginia state law for anyone to disturb or remove monuments to war veterans. And the federal government has ruled that Confederate veterans are American veterans.
This is an interview that's going to air this weekend on One America. It's a long interview where he's giving his perspective, whether you agree with him or not. But in talking about the monuments, there's now more calls. They're not just going for Confederate monuments. They're saying take down Jefferson, erase Mount Rushmore, and the president says, when is that going to be too far? And you agree with that, Jared?
I do, and I've written about this extensively at the Daily Signal. I really do believe there's a slippery slope when it comes to these monuments. I think these radical activist groups, they don't make any distinction between Jefferson Davis and Thomas Jefferson. They are attacking American history, frankly, and they want to encourage this kind of tribal identity politics. That's what the radicals on the other side want as well. I think most Americans want to preserve American history. Yes, there are some ugly things from American history, but there's a lot of great things to preserve too. And I think that that's something that these groups want. They want to destroy it all wholesale.
I think it's a question too. I mean, it helps us remember what did happen and to let that never happen again.
Absolutely. We learn from the history. But I'm also troubled too by those individuals who say that we have to erase history as if that's going to improve. That's what ISIS does. That's what the Taliban does.
That's a good point.
That's what the former Soviet Union did. That's what's happening in North Korea. These are not the approaches that the American people
And that's
should
not the
expect.
approach that President Trump wants, and he's getting a lot of pushback on that. And we're going to have to go to break now, but we're going to come back and we're going to see more about President Trump's response, the fallout this week, and what that means for his administration going forward after this break. Welcome back. You're watching Washington Wrap Up, and clearly the violence in Charlottesville dominated the news cycle this week. In my White House coverage over last weekend, I said moments like this often define a presidency, and this president is getting a lot of criticism for his response. Let's listen.
It is insulting. The president is ignorant of history. He does not know context. He should be ashamed of himself.
We have to look at this as they look at it. They are taking it as a signal that Trump is giving them a thumbs up.
I didn't want a Clinton or a Bush in the White House, but I sure as hell didn't want a Duke in the White House.
When he says that there are Nazis, there are white supremacists that are in the crowd, and there's good people on both sides, I wonder to the president, where are the good people you're referring to?
In response to this negative media coverage and criticism about President Trump's response, a lot of CEOs are defecting from his boards. Republicans are distancing themselves from the president. What does this mean with pushing his agenda, Horace?
Well, we at the Free Enterprise Project were very concerned about the decision of several of these members to drop off on the Manufacturing Council and resulting ultimately in the president's decision to disband it. Here's the thing. If you are a 72-year-old black retired teacher living in Mississippi, you have investments, whether it's Merck, whether it's General Motors, etc. Your livelihood is impacted by the decisions that these CEOs are making. And the consequences, we have a radically different opportunity than we've had over the last 8 years. The President of the United States is saying to business, come, sit down with me, tell me what the problems are that you face.
And now they're trying to shut
that retiree gets a benefit.
And now they're Walmart. The CEO of Walmart came out against President Trump in his response this week. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I think that Walmart customers are a strong Trump base.
Oh, absolutely.
I just don't know how smart that was.
My point is that shareholders, that the workforce in these corporations, and the consumers and the retirees that are also investors all have their livelihoods in the hands of these CEOs. And if they decide that political correctness is more important than their fiduciary responsibilities, we're on a very, very dangerous course. It's a shame that they've taken this responsibility and this opportunity and kicked it to the curb. It's almost as if they'd rather go back to the last 8 years where the federal government was hostile to free enterprise.
Regulation, regulation, regulation. Now,
listen, you're not really pushing moral equivalence if you just point out that the Antifa protesters have embraced violence as one of their tactics. I mean, that's objectively true.
That's a fact.
And so as you, I mean, you follow elections, you're a voting rights expert. What do you think Republican candidates are going to do in 2018? Are we going to start seeing a trend where they distance themselves from President Trump, where in the past his endorsement has meant a lot?
I don't know. I mean, you know, there's a culture in this country about what you can and can't say and how you do and don't apologize when you've said it or not said it. And there's a culture of checking how quickly people respond and what they say and whether it's according to the book, the unwritten book. You know, Trump ignores those rules. He doesn't care about those rules.
He's not backing down on his statements. Actually, he doubled down, Jarrett, on the monuments, saying, no, we shouldn't take down any of these monuments, because at what point do you stop?
That's right, and I actually think that the American people respond to these issues a lot differently than, frankly, the hysterical media that has to these same issues. I think, you know, polls have remained fairly steady for Trump after this, and on the monument issue, there was a recent poll that came out that showed that a majority of Americans want to keep the Confederate monuments, including a plurality of African Americans. I mean, this is something that if you were watching the media reports, you'd say, well, Trump is done, he's finished, Americans don't want this, but I think the American people think something very differently than the people in most of the media
I think you're right, but what I'm still reading today in Politico is that this, Horace, is not going to let, because of this, President Trump won't be able to garner support for tax reform. He won't be able to get support for infrastructure, which is a big focus this week at the White House.
Well, here's the truth. We were told when he ran for president to start with that his style, his approach, and his platform would not find popular appeal. He managed to run in a group of 17 and triumph. Then we were told, well, the Republicans have nominated the wrong person, and it's a cakewalk for Hillary. Now look who sits in the White House. Many of these people continue to tell us. I think what we're going to witness is what's called the Bradley effect. You talk to some pollsters and you say what you're supposed to say about answers to these politically correct questions, but when the time comes to vote, people are going to say, what did you do about jobs? What did you do about this economy? Are you making America safe? That's where his focus is, and his actions show that. Magic words aren't what the people care about.
Well, the economy is back on track. More jobs have been created. We're getting more investments. Everything's going right, but yet everyone is focused on what they say he does wrong, which is questionable. Should he have condemned the alt-right?
But he did condemn the alt-right.
I mean,
He
immediately.
did condemn neo-Nazis. What I don't understand is this idea that Main Street, Washington, D.C. has, that we have a little script, and you must read the script, and if you don't say the words exactly as the script says, then you're worse than the people that we told you to say in the script were bad.
Wasn't that what we voted against?
The American people reject that. That's exactly what they voted against, and this is why he sits in the White House and why the others who were aspirants do not.
Doesn't Antifa have a website in which they describe their tactics and their preferred means of achieving?
They say their goal is to use violence to stop the kinds of speech that they disagree with, a fundamental rejection of the First Amendment.
And you can point that out without apologizing for, even implicitly, the horrible murder that was committed by that man.
And with regard to memorials and Confederates, if Adolf Hitler comes out in favor of milk, it doesn't mean if you say nice things about milk that you somehow have sympathies with Adolf Hitler. These groups are trying to raise their profile by picking issues that the American people actually do have some resonance with. It doesn't mean they agree with those groups. It means those groups are trying to come into the Main Street Square.
So do you think that, speaking of Main Street and speaking of business, do you think that these businesses that are getting political, Target saw a big drop in revenue from getting political last year. Do you think they're going to...
Well, my organization is going to be drawing up shareholder resolutions to make sure that we give people at these companies a voice over which is more important, political correctness for the CEO or actual shareholder value return. That's how the free enterprise system is supposed to work, and the Securities and Exchange Commission and congressional statute expect that of these CEOs.
That's right. Well, shoppers is one way that they vote at the stores, right? And like you said, the votes might still be there. We're going to actually talk about voting when we come back from this break. We're going to move on to elections and their integrity with Robert giving us some insight into what Judicial Watch is specifically doing in that regard, right when we get back from the break. Welcome back to the show. The Vice President, along with Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach, continue their voter fraud commission, and just last week, a Virginia college student was sentenced to 100 days behind bars for registering dead voters for Democrats. A study found that 800,000 illegal immigrants voted in the 2016 election, with likely the majority, probably about 80%, voting for Hillary Clinton. Yet that's still a far cry from the 5 million President Trump has said votes illegally. But Judicial Watch is leading a voter integrity project that Robert's going to tell us about. Tell us about what's going on with this.
Well, what we do is we look for counties based on the most recent federal data. It was a new batch of data was just released in July of this year. And we try to find counties where the number of registered voters exceeds the citizen voting age population. That's citizens over the age of 18.
Okay.
About 3,000 counties in the country. We had data for about 2,400 of these counties. 1/5 of them had more registered voters than citizen voting age population.
You're
That's
kidding
up from
me.
2 years ago. That was about 12%. Now it's about 20%.
Wow. And now you've actually sent is it a letter to California to tell them they're on watch? They need to clean their voter rolls.
Yes, listen, there's a federal statute, the National Voter Registration Act, that requires states to clean up their voter rolls. The Department of Justice used to enforce that statute, and I used to work at the Department of Justice.
Okay.
I brought the last NVRA lawsuit it ever brought in 2007. Nothing since then. And so private organizations like Judicial Watch have taken to sending out statutory notice letters, advising them that we will sue if they don't clean up their voter rolls. We sent these letters to 11 California counties and to the Secretary of State. Those counties had more registered voters than citizen voting age population. In one case, the registration rate, Los Angeles County, was 144%.
So that is kind of hitting close up to Trump's number, right?
Yes. You know, I have to say, as a native Californian, this really sticks close to home for me because I know it's just an anecdote, but I left California over 5 years ago, and I've registered to vote in Virginia and Washington, D.C. I still get absentee ballots in California. My parents receive them at their house. They have told the government, I no longer live there. Please no longer send these. And every year around voting time, there's the ballot there at my parents' house. I mean, to me, that just shows, look at the kind of abuse that can take place in this system.
And you could vote, and I'm not suggesting you commit a crime. I know that you won't, but you could vote that ballot.
I think I could too. I still have a valid, even though I've asked them to cancel it, I still have a valid California driver's license. I might not after this, but I do right now. Does that mean I could go vote?
Possibly you could. I mean, listen, states have to clean up their voter rolls. They have to do this pursuant to federal law, and we're telling them that we will sue them if they don't do this. But these actions have consequences. These improper, ineligible registrations can be voted even today.
What were you going to say, Horace?
The President's Commission and Judicial Watch are doing the Lord's work here. Our Constitution is premised on the idea that the citizen gets to decide what the policies in our country is going to be. If you dilute the right of the citizens to be able to do that, this is no different than what happened in the 40s, 50s, and 60s when in certain communities your race prevented you from being able to have a full say.
But that's an issue they're bringing up, the people who are against cleaning up voter rolls. They're saying it's actually going to, it's an attack on certain races to keep them from voting.
It's the opposite. It makes it clear that real citizens get to have a say. And it's ironic to me that when you start seeing this cleanup, what you notice is fewer people support socialism, fewer people support the progressive policy when they're real. Ghosts and criminals and multi-voters all seem to have a penchant for the left of center. And that, to me, is a violation of the fundamental idea of self-determination.
Well, listen to how bad it could get. I mean, the truth is that we don't know a lot of the extent of voter fraud in this country, and that's why the commission is a good idea. We need more data, not less. We need to understand this.
So what do you think about that study that says 800,000? You think that number's higher, is what it sounds like you're saying to me?
We don't know. Here's what we do know. There's this enormous online database, and I think it's something like 80,000 people over the course of 2 years have given their data to a website. And unlike political polls that typically say, are you a citizen? And if you say no, they lose all interest in you. This website didn't do that. It continued to track what you said even after you said you were not a citizen. And they had 800 responses out of this group who said that they were non-citizens, and of those, 14% said they were registered to vote, 6% said they voted in 2008, 2% said they voted in the off year in 2010, and here's the problem. If you extrapolate these numbers to the numbers of non-citizens in this country, this could easily be enormous. This could be
So it really could swing an election.
It could be. You know, we don't know the extent to which it has. Needless to say, just the explosive conclusions of this study have led to an enormous fight over its validity. The authors stand by the study. You know, one criticism that was made was that perhaps people hit the button saying they were a non-citizen in error. I've spoken to the author, and he told me that in the subsequent 2-year period, 80% of the people who said they were non-citizens the first time around said it again.
So it wasn't a...
It was not an
That's
error.
interesting. How long does California have? How longer?
Oh, they have 90 days. They have 90 days.
and then you can, if they don't respond, you sue.
Yes,
You
yes.
bring a
We're
lawsuit.
happy to talk to
And
people. You know,
Judicial
suing
Watch
is the
has
last
a good record
resort.
with their lawsuits, so they might want to respond, right?
I
Okay,
hope that they do.
real quick before we go, I'd like to ask just a question where we have one-word answer. And Jarrett, you brought up a study that says that the majority of Americans don't want the monuments brought down. I found that study. I want to know, what is the number of Americans who think they should be, if you can take a guess. What do you think, Horace?
I'm going to go with 35%.
37%.
40. This is like the Price is
those
Right.
are actually really high guesses. The answer is 27%. Just 27% support even bringing those statues down. And again, I want to mention that we do have an exclusive interview going this weekend from One America's John Hines with Jason Kessler, the organizer of Unite the Right. That'll be at 11 and 5 on this Saturday and Sunday. So you can tune in and get, maybe a different perspective. But that's all the time we have today. We thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look for you again next week on the Washington Wrap-Up.